Welcome into the Bird Reboot here. We've got the two co-hosts, Blake Murphy and Marcos Labrada, aka Pancakes Soul, and talking about a Cardinals win today. Cardinals went into this game, they were underdogs. A lot of us wondered if the Cardinals were going to be able to cover the spread. The Eagles, on the other hand, came into this game probably looking at it as a get-right game. They had lost 3 of their last 4, got a win against the Giants. But that defense had a lot of question marks, and Arizona was able to take advantage of that and be able to walk off at least with a game ending touchdown with a final score of, I think it was 34-31. 35-31, actually. So, Marcos, this was a game that I know a lot of Cardinals fans probably didn't want them to win. They probably wanted Arizona to continue the tank, to continue to get that number 2 pick. They slide back to the 4th overall draft spot, and with Kyler Murray playing well in that second half, they now enter an interesting final week against a Seattle Seahawks team that needs to win to keep their playoff dreams alive. DJ Humphries also has gone to IR. We'll be able to discuss some of that. But first of all, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm doing better than I have the last actual couple weeks. That bug is completely gone, at least in my system. Of course, I got my setup going a little bit different today, so trying something new, and I look like don't even have any features on my face because the light's blaring on me. But other than that, I'm doing good.
Yeah, everyone knows at least with proper lighting is one of those things you always play around with for the most part. So let's talk a little bit about with Arizona against the Eagles because I felt like in this game, the biggest mismatches for Arizona were going to be in the run game, struggling to stop the run, and then in the pass game. Really, what it turned into essentially was Cardinals put up 29 points in the second half after they started down 21-6. Second half, they did not punt the entire game, and they actually started cashing in and turning those field goals into touchdowns. Meanwhile, the defense did a better job. Eagles were able to drive down running the ball on one drive. But when they had to settle for a field goal after a interesting decision by Jonathan Gannon to score a touchdown and then immediately go for an onside kick with probably about 2 to 3 minutes left in the game, that was one of those areas where a lot of people, I think, in real time, at first were like, why did you do that? And then a second later, it was, oh, if you kick the ball to the Eagles and they just drive down to kick a field goal, you don't have enough time left to be able to drive down. Essentially, it was kind of a, hey, we'll let the Eagles score because this is a tie game right now. Even if they go down and score, we'll then want to make sure we get the ball back with enough time. What ended up happening was the Eagles were only able to kick a field goal, while Arizona was able to score with about 30 seconds left on the clock. Essentially, a last-second Hail Mary from Jalen Hurts went down, was picked off at the very end, and Arizona was able to walk up to a 4-12 record, while the Eagles have started off at 10-1, and they now fall to 11-5. And this is a big game for Jonathan Gannon. Maybe not that he would say, but one that a lot of other people and players talked about because it's like the older brother, little brother. When your little brother goes away to school and then comes back, you always feel like you want to just like kind of beat up on the little brother. There's always that connection that's there. And it was a staff that he and Nick Rallis had spent quite a bit of time on in Philly. We're able to see a lot of success getting to the Super Bowl. And I think I said before, this would be the funniest Cardinals win because of just the perception that Eagles fans had of Jonathan Gannon, how a lot of people viewed him nationally, especially when you look at how the two records played like each other. But the Eagles looked like the team that was 4-12, and the Cardinals looked like the team that was probably playing closer to 11-5 football when it all is said and done. And I think that gives some optimism for folks in Arizona, both at the quarterback and the coaching place. Don't you agree?
Like I mentioned and kept consistent, I never thought anything different about the quarterback. There are some things that I did notice on this game that I think we could build moving forward. And I've been having this conversation with somebody on X about like the type of help that we need on the offensive line. Those front three you got to give them a lot of credit. The center and the center guard tandem that we had going on, especially with the fact that they had to take on people like Jalen Carter and like not Jordan Phillips. I was about to say Big Jordan Davis, and they created that space up front, which gave Kyler Murray space to be able to throw and like more vision. So I was like, yeah, that helped out very well, that tandem, because Matt Patricia, we discussed this before, kept sending the same four down rushes, three down rushes, which we were able to neutralize. So, and also, I mean, I mentioned this last week, and remember I told you the Philadelphia Eagles are having issues.
Yep.
So their issues are they're very static on offense, and on defense they can't stop the run, just like the 2021 Cardinals. And I wasn't surprised. I was like, look, they're gonna probably maybe even win this game. I didn't think it was gonna be like this, but I thought, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if the Cardinals win.
Right. No, Arizona at least was able to start with a 3-and-out. They went and got a field goal, and then the Eagles were able to drive down the field. It felt like the Eagles were able to have a balanced attack in the first half. They were able to run the ball. They didn't run it as far as like running over Arizona, but they did a pretty good job of being able to drive down the field and being able to get that touchdown. Julio Jones actually ended up with, I believe it was the first, I think it was 2 touchdowns, unless I'm mistaken, at least against Arizona, which is funny because you forget that he's still on that Eagles team because he's just up there in age as far as a receiver. It's kind of like the last year of Larry Fitzgerald where he caught that touchdown against the Eagles. You're like, oh yeah, well we know that Fitz is on the Cardinals, but Julio's gone from like team to team, and he still has that physical ability. Cardinals just the coverage was not that tight. Arizona, when they came back in the second half, the immediate adjustment that they had was being able to just rely on James Conner. And we even got to see Michael Wilson make some plays, which I thought was big because in the first half, there was the miscommunication in which you can see that the way the safety was placed, where Michael Wilson was, Kyler essentially saw it looked like one-on-one coverage. The safety came over late, and there wasn't any Michael Wilson to make a play on the ball whatsoever because he took the inside lane. That left the ball just for an easy catch by the safety, and he got blocking on the way back, was able to turn that into a long interception touchdown of about 99 yards since he caught it at the 1 yard line. That was the one mistake where it felt like that could have sunk the Cardinals, but in the second half, they were able to force a couple of 3-and-outs, and the Eagles did not get the ball back that much in the second half, nor did they stop Arizona. They had a 3-and-out to start their second half drive. They did get a touchdown, but ended the day with getting a field goal, whereas the Cardinals were able to run off again. 3 touchdowns, I think it was actually 4 touchdowns in a row in the second half. Eagles could not get a stop to save their lives. We can talk at least about the Matt Patricia impact, but that was one of the areas that we can at least see is when you're a team that's struggling on defense, there's times where you can identify the problem, and there's times where the problem at least is just it's part of where your team was. We saw in the 2021 Arizona Cardinals, they were missing kind of the heart and soul of their offense. And when it came to it, they were missing the heart and soul of their defense with J.J. Watt. And we saw the impact of not having a healthy offensive line with the heart of their O-line and Rodney Hudson. And they were just not a good team down the stretch. Kyler was able to make some plays to win against the Cowboys, but that team just kind of was on a slow slide down. We are seeing a similar thing with the Eagles because switching their defensive coordinator to one with experience and Matt Patricia, that Marcos has not really been a fix. In fact, it almost looks like the Eagles' defense has gotten worse, if you can believe it.
They have gone worse, and it's not a secret. Everybody in the NFL knows at this point that this defense has regressed. We were looking at like the offseason when they lost all those pieces, and we were thinking to ourselves, is this team even going to be able to repeat? And, it was always like shrugged off as if like, well, no, they have the culture. They'll figure out a way to be able to like replace the lost pieces, both on coordinator and on players. But then we're seeing the impact right now. We are, like you also mentioned, like those linebackers, like they're just not being able to fill in the role that the former linebackers filled, and TJ Edwards and even Kaiser White. Even though Kaiser White hasn't had the career that he had back in Philly, he's still a big loss to them. And plus, those corners are aging. The line lost Hargrave. We had to have the rookie step up, Jalen Carter for I mean, he's been filling the role very good and very admirably. But then they also lost Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, which was a big
Mm-hmm.
loss as well. So you had all
They
these
replaced him
pieces,
with
and now
Kevin Byard, who's another 31-year-old like aging safety, and Shaq Leonard being like they just have a lot of older guys right now, and that's part of how they've tried to patch this defense up. And it seems like that they just have lost a lot of the juice that they've had for the most part, and teams have taken advantage of that.
yeah, and especially also with the coordinators. I mean, we had this rumor about like maybe it wasn't Jonathan Gannon who was calling the defense. Maybe this whole time it was Vic pulling the strings, but Jonathan Gannon still had to be down on the field, coaching these guys and then coaching up the defenses and whatnot. So, I mean, that loss, it's just too many pieces that were lost, and now it's taking its toll on the Eagles, and they have to change it. They basically have to like upgrade to or just get with the times when it comes to like on offense and on defense. Don't be so static. Learn your lesson because at the end of the day,
Mm-hmm.
if you're static on offense, the teams are gonna know how to defend you and they're gonna make it very easy. They're just gonna send their rushers on a super wide angle to be able to get to your quarterback, and that's gonna force him to have to leave the pocket sooner, even with that offensive line.
No, definitely. The offensive line also for Arizona did very well in this past game. It was probably the best game that we have seen yet from the likes of Paris Johnson, at least as a rookie, which is something that's always encouraging. You want to see rookies at least just be able to get on the field, be able to play, learn the game. You also want to be able to have um, your players, if they can, when they hit that rookie wall, or sometimes they'll call it the sophomore slump when they're a young player, you will see progress, and that will tell you whether that player, if they hit the wall, if it was just their athleticism showed up, teams adjusted, and suddenly they don't have any other tricks that they can pull. They don't have any other things they can learn. I think there's times you can call someone a one trick pony at least. Like there's some players who they have one move that they can have, but it's a really good move as far as when it comes to rushing the passer. And there's other times where it's not. Now, one of the things at least that I think we can talk about also is just the coaching because like we said when Jonathan Gannon and the staff came in, we've said these guys are an improvement in the coaching staff. Maybe not in ways that will be immediate because of a rebuild, but in terms of being able to see adjustments, being able to see a different preparation and offensive scheme. And for what it's worth, the Eagles coaches were outcoached against the Cardinals in this last game. So one of the things, at least from Benjamin Solak, a national guy with the Ringer does podcast, also an Eagles fan. He had this to be able to say at least about one of the adjustments that Arizona made that the Eagles did not, which was Hassan Reddick. He was their best pass rusher, at least. Obviously, we know that Arizona will let him get away. He dropped into coverage more time than ever enjoying the Eagles. So anytime the Eagles went with a 5-1 front, which basically was you would kind of put five people down on the field as far as the front would go, rushing five so you can get to the passer a little bit easier with one-on-one matchups. A lot of times it will also give you a tackle versus edge rusher type of approach. The Cardinals just went hurry up, spread formation out, and Hassan Reddick had to drop back into coverage. And essentially, the Eagles never were able to find a way to adjust. Arizona was just able to kind of play that card every once in a while, at least whenever they would see it. And there was not really adjustments that we got to see. So think of it kind of like if it's in a chess match, the knight moves over here, and then they just keep using their knights again and again. At the same time, you just are able to counter that and remove them from the board. It is a fascinating thing to me to think that the Eagles are kind of on this losing streak, and a lot of people in Philly right now are wondering, hey, like, was the secret sauce not Nick Sirianni? Was this kind of like a Gannon and Shane Steichen, who is playing for a playoff berth with Gardner Minshew this week against the Houston Texans? So, Godspeed to the Colts. As Cardinals fans, we're all rooting for you guys to beat the Texans. This is just a place where I think that you have to not just be able to credit Kyler Murray. I think it's a negative on the Eagles, that's for sure. But these are games played by both players on either side pushing toward it. You have to give credit where credit is due, and probably the biggest credit does go to Kyler Murray. Kyler was nearly unstoppable in the second half. I believe he completed 13 of 14 for 100 and I think it was 33 yards, and he had, I believe, 3 touchdowns on the day. He had a phenomenal game-winning drive, finished with a grand total of 25 of 31 with 3 touchdowns, and the Cardinals had 35 points on the board. They did not punt in the entire game. I think that Jonathan Gannon even joked about that later. They're like, "Hey, it's a credit to your players." Like, well, everyone except for Blake Gillikin, the punter, because he just got to stand around and look because he had a couple nice holds. He said, but that was about it because Cardinals' offense did work. They were able to run on the Eagles to the tune of 221 yards. James Conner averaged almost 5 yards a carry, and then Michael Carter, who came in and showed
Carter.
some juice, he had a long gain of 21, had a touchdown of the day. He averaged 8.7 yards per carry. He only touched it 7 times, but man, he had juice. He picked up 61 yards on the ground, and it puts you in kind of a good, confident position for Arizona, saying, all right, like, Cardinals are not picking top two. You probably are going to move ahead with the likes of a Kyler Murray. And if you've got a core of James Conner, Michael Carter, and Amari DiMercado, maybe you can add someone to the mix if it feels like it's the right fit. But you're more going to be probably prepping for that guy who's going to be taking over for James Conner in 2 years versus looking at James Conner and that contract and going, yeah, we got to make it. We got to be able to move on. He has played very well this year. And at the end of the day, I think that the game ball, if I had to give one, would probably go to Kyler and, of course, to Greg Dortch. And we'll break down some of the film here in a second on that final game-winning drive. But, Marcos, there's a lot of game balls, it feels like, that could go around. What did you feel like was at least the defining player of this game?
I so what I like what they did on the ground. So I mean, Michael Carter, I can't say enough about him. Like the guy, like the move that he made on that wide open, like I think it was a defensive back that we got on the ground, and to be able to gain the yards afterwards, that was awesome. And that was a great play that only gets made by somebody who's shifty enough to be able to do that. So I really hope that we keep him for the foreseeable future. But I have to give it up to, I mean, I have to give it up to Kyler Murray because he did have, I would believe, either his second best game when it comes to like PFF grades wise, or his best game of the year. And it was not a shock to me because he had his best game, not statistically wise, but on film last year during the Eagles. So against the Eagles last year, he was he was hitting all parts of the field, especially attacking over the middle. So this wasn't like that for some reason. Like Kyler Murray can do well versus some teams, and then versus the other teams he just can't crack the code against. But the Eagles are definitely a team who he's had success against, even going back during his sophomore season when they played him in 2020. He just had himself a very good game. So I think Kyler Murray just has this tendency to just be able to like dominate the Eagles and the Cowboys. Especially, I mean, the Cowboys and the Eagles are just NFC East like juggernauts, and he for some reason can compete, and he can compete big even if it's like away. But that offensive line, you got to also give him credit. Run blocking wise, They did a really wonderful job. Um, the running backs, Michael Wilson finally getting the connection with Kyler Murray. Of course, we had that little bit, and I have a little bit of criticism to give about that interception when it comes to the communication. But other than that, like being able to deliver the ball to him and knowing that he's a shifty person off the line of scrimmage, so knowing to throw it on his breaks, just like he did with Greg Dortch, that is going to come in. That's going to do wonders when it comes to like knowing what your wide receiver can do. He's not somebody that's going to beat people and stack on top of corners. He's going to be somebody who's going to win off his breaks. And when he plants that foot, you have to make sure you throw it with timing so that once he breaks away, gives himself that little bit of like that 1 or 2 yard separation, he's right there to be able to catch it. We saw that. Great on them. And I mean, I got to also give it up to the defense. The defense didn't give up as many points as what the box score shows because one of those touchdowns was a pick six.
Yep,
but
that's right.
They did really well, especially all around unit basically.
Yep, the Eagles threw the ball a lot, and with Arizona having like I think still the 31st ranked rushing defense, it was baffling because there was a lot of times where you could tell that Arizona was seemingly dialed in to the point where it felt like that the Eagles at one point, I'm like, just kind of just run the ball, guys. Like, you did it in the first half. You got up at least with the 21 because of the interception that was returned for 6. And instead of doing the Sean McVay approach, which is like, oh, hey, look, I've got Kyron Williams. I'm just going to keep running Kyron Williams until you can stop him. They were trying to be able to take some of these deep shots. We're trying some throws. They ended up with Devonta Smith spraining his ankle. He had 3 catches for 30 yards. A.J. Brown, a lot of what I think we've seen with A.J. Brown this year that has been different from previous years is they're kind of using it almost like I would say almost like the Cliff Kingsbury style, at least, where there's 2 receivers on the outside. You got Dallas Goedert as like your middle tight end, and you're kind of just sending guys down the field. Whereas one of the things with A.J. Brown that I feel like one of his strengths is if you pull him in, line him up in the slot, and then being able to deal with some of those over routes in the middle of the field, because he just kills guys on that because of his size and speed as a combination. And we've seen Devonta Smith, at least, with some of those outside catches. When I watched the Eagles last year versus this year, it really did feel like there was some subtlety in how they were able to not just set up some of those pass action plays, but they were able to actually run the ball more effectively. And they actually were able to then get separation for those guys on some of those outside throws because the corners were having to look into the backfield because the safeties weren't able to get over and they could beat that one-on-one coverage. This year, they've not done the same. They've had only, I think it was 66 total rushing yards on only 23 attempts. 8 of those for 25 yards were from Jalen Hurts, and they ended up with under 100 rushing yards total. Cardinals snapped a streak of the Eagles holding opposing teams under 200 rushing yards a game that's gone on for like who knows how many years. And I do agree with you that last year we talked also about how the Eagles were 5-0 at the time, and then they ended up finishing, I believe, with a win against Arizona. That came down to a missed field goal. The Cardinals had Matt Amendola, at least, where the Eagles, and the Cardinals, it was a back and forth where the Eagles ran the ball for that, I think it was like 17 plays down the field to kick only a field goal. Arizona held them out of the end zone. Cardinals get the ball back. They run the ball all the way down to the Philly 25, and Matt Amendola just misses the 43-yarder, and that was just game for the most part. Cardinals probably should have at least sent that game into overtime. They ended up basically, and this is kind of a long-standing tradition of the Cardinals have kind of just been Eagle killers. If there's one team that like Eagles fans would probably hate as much as the Cowboys, you probably would say that Arizona would be one because they've had some of those huge games in the past, at least with the NFC Championship game. I think about the 99-yard interception return that they got at least from Carey. I believe it was their one safety that they had for the 1 year. Carey. I'll remember at least that one. But they had one of those games which kind of killed part of the Michael Vick second year that they had at least. They've had games where like they beat the Eagles. I believe it was a few years ago with the, I'm going to say it was a big rout at least, but it's one of those places at least where the other thing you could look at is just the Larry Fitzgerald game, because Fitz would just go off and get like 2 to 3 touchdowns a time, at least it would seem. Like you said, it is one of those interesting rivalries because the Cardinals used to be in the NFC East. They used to play the Eagles a lot more often. And with Jonathan Gannon there now, there's some bad blood where Eagles fans, I know, had always said, hey, they threw a party when Gannon left. There's talk at least about he was the guy who was fully to blame. And then there was frustration over the tampering that had happened where the Eagles kind of got to move up in the third round with Arizona. And a lot of people were just very much looking at Jonathan Gannon saying, this guy, he's the reason why we lost that Super Bowl. In hindsight, there's been articles that have come out with one of the headlines being, did Jonathan Gannon like take a piece of that culture that was defining Philly with him to Arizona? And I think that's really something that if that's the case, Cardinals fans should be very pleased in that one of the things we wanted to learn this year was, do they have a coaching staff that we can trust and believe in for the long term, and at least through 1 year, despite the record, which we all expected to be that way, they've had some hard-fought wins, and the team in Week 17 is still playing hard for Jonathan Gannon. I think that it's absolutely a box that you have to say is checked off if you're Arizona.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I get so, I'm sorry, I get so like triggered whenever I hear about like the Jonathan Gannon, like the Super Bowl was his fault. or like, hey, he pretty much like kind of mailed it in during the Super Bowl because of what happened. Now, I'm not saying that I'm happy about the tampering thing. It was tampering, you broke the rules, and then when asked about it, he lied about it, okay? So yeah, but at the end of the day, you still have to play X's and O's. And who's gonna want to go out there and say like, hey, I don't care if we lose the Super Bowl? Like, no one's gonna say that. That's still a feather in somebody's cap if they go out there, they perform, they win the Super Bowl, and let's just say he won the Super Bowl, then got the job for the Cardinals. Do people criticize him as much? No, they don't. Do people say the things that they say about him, like, oh yeah, you mailed it in because you guys lost? Well, Jonathan Gannon isn't trying to lose a Super Bowl. Situations not only dictated that, for one, things were out of his control that led to that. Two situations. One was the fumble on offense that led to a score. Was
Mm-hmm.
that Jonathan Gannon's fault? No, it wasn't. Why did the numbers look different? And it's funny because I actually have an article written about that, breaking it all down, saying like on that first half, the 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 Chiefs didn't rule the time of possession because of the fact that they didn't have to be on the field very long. For one, the Eagles offense took a lot of time off the clock. For
Mm-hmm.
two, that you know that fumble return for a touchdown kept them in the game, which means like if that doesn't happen on that situation, which by the way, Shane Steichen's the one who called a quarterback draw on that, which led to the fumble.
Yeah.
And you know, the second half, it was just more playing like normal, like, hey, drive and drive and drive. But then, of course, you have a punt return for like 65 yards that puts the Chiefs at the 5 yard line. The Chiefs out of all teams. That's not his fault.
Yeah, and then they had this little quick swing pass at least to Kadarius Toney with the touchdown, and that ended up being the end. There were two spots I think here when you look at it being an offensive game that came down to some coaching decisions as well. Coming out of the half, Arizona drives down the field, scores the touchdown. You're like, okay, it's a one score game now, 13-21. Eagles get to 3rd and 5 at their own 30-yard line, and they attempt a deep pass to Devonta Smith that's incomplete. And that was one of those areas where you wonder, the Eagles' bread and butter this year has not really been even that deep ball. Just there's still in production, but it just hasn't quite been there. A lot of what's worked for them has been you run the ball on 3rd down, especially against a poor run defending team, or you at least run and get it to where it's close enough to the sticks because you'll know that you've got that automatic tush push that you'll be able to have for the brotherly shove. And they ended up punting at least there. Arizona drove down for another touchdown. And then late in the game, you had one kind of error that when the Cardinals were kind of coming back and made it a tie game that the Eagles had, which was the offensive holding call with 4 minutes left in the fourth quarter. They just run the ball. There was a penalty on holding on Jordan Mailata. Zaven Collins, who I think, of course, is having an underrated season. When you look at his season-wide group, he's been one of their best run defending players. And in this part of the run, he draws the holding call. That's a 10-yard penalty after the Eagles had driven into the Arizona red zone at the 20-yard line. So now you back him up for 10 yards. Jalen Hurts kind of takes off for the most part. They end up tackling him short for -3 on 2nd and 16. So you're like, okay, you're probably just going to kick the field goal here. And they had an opportunity at 1st and 10 from the Cardinals' 20-yard line. You would say, just kind of get the ball closer, see if you can pick up a 1st down. And that penalty really set them back to the point where after that, Arizona took the ball over with 2 minutes and 33 seconds left. And again, this is the onside kick drive that was there. So you're talking about you've got the ball. There's 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter. You're trying to run the ball, and your one player just holds a guy, and it sets you back where you're kind of at the 30-yard line. It's not a gimme field goal. You have to kind of then just adjust and get it forward. And they were not able to run off that much time off the clock. And I think that just speaks to the fault that I think we've seen with the Eagles this year has been that there's similar faults to the Cardinals, and where there can be poorly timed penalties. There can be sometimes not playing together. But we've at least see how Arizona, they made their identity into a running attack that was able to kind of come back in this game. And they also were able to kind of define a little bit more through what we've seen, at least with the rise of Greg Dortch. So I'm going to go over this. This is from Nate Tice's film study, at least, that we have this week. And we'll go and break this down with looking at Kyler's game-winning drive. So after forcing that field goal, Kyler Murray's here. And we're able to at least see a couple of nice plays. So the first one here, I believe, is a nice tight throw from the pocket under pressure just kind of tosses it
Yep.
over into the soft coverage right there to Greg Dortch. Marcos, I loved this play from Kyler more than any other because of the pressure that he was under, being able to not just see over, but being able to see that linebacker dropping back in coverage and delivering a beautiful ball to Greg Dortch. This was very much what we've wanted to see from Kyler Murray this year from the pocket.
Yeah. Well, like you see the like the space kind of crashing in. Well, he's anticipating that throw, which is what I've been mentioning about him. Like he needs to anticipate where his wide receiver is going to be at. So you see Rondale Moore kind of break over the middle right there, and then he throws it with that little bit of space that he has to be able to see. He just sees enough, knowing that he's breaking on that, going into that like that not that dig route, but kind of like an out route over the middle, and he just goes and throws it with touch and with anticipation. So that's the thing of beauty right there. I love that right there.
Yeah, that's one of those places, at least with from the pocket, you can also see how he's adjusted his arm angle. He's not able to kind of deliver it as clean, but like you said, right at the point where Rondale Moore is going to make his break, um, he essentially is just looking and seeing Rondale's got that soft spot and the zone coverage behind it. You've got a linebacker in coverage underneath. We've seen in the past where Kyler's like, yeah, I can fit that over there, and he'll force a flat throw versus throwing with touch. And we know that he can throw with touch. It was one of the things we saw in tape coming out. And he at least is able to, in this spot for the most part, just kind of trust the mechanics, flips the ball up a little bit, and he doesn't need to put a whole lot of sauce on it because Moore is open. And these are some of the plays that I think, at least, that we've seen other quarterbacks at least struggle with in the National Football League. We've also seen Kyler in the past, maybe in this spot. If he's not trusting his coverage, he may end up looking to kind of move back and out of the pocket, let those pass rushers
Yeah.
get up. Instead, he just stands firm, knows that he's probably going to be close to taking a hit, and Rondale Moore is able to come with the ball. No, it's Moore, not Dortch. Now, this is the one play, at least, where you look at how he was able to just do a nice timed out route. This is just very quick and simple to be able to go and hit Dortch. So you can see at least you got two guys on the line. You got, at least as far as with your coverage, you got the one safety deep. They're playing essentially looks like man coverage across the board. He gets the ball, and you're at least immediately able to read over what the two linebackers are watching in the middle of the field, being able to see James Conner is next to him. So this is kind of one of your typical pass plays where we've seen in Cliff's offense, he would want to have a fake to try to pull a lot of times where he would try to fake the zone read. And if he didn't have a strong run game, there would be issues with it. Here, he just takes the ball back. James Conner, at least, is sent out onto an option route right here, where essentially if the drop back, for the most part, is taking some of the guys away, and if the receiver doesn't get that free break off the line, then maybe you're able to hit him for a pickup. He just is able to hit this ball just as Dortch is coming out of his break. The corner, you can see there at 31, is just not able to get over quick enough. This is one thing we can talk about with Philly with some of their aging corners. Dortch just plants his foot and then is able to kind of round back to the route. You pick up the first down pretty easily. This is more of just the typical tempo throws. Kyler, when he gets into a rhythm, we've seen some of these things before, just few and far between. And this is the final play, I think, at least, that was the backbreaker for the Eagles. Marcos, this is the Greg Dortch catch and run that we get to see from a little bit of a... I guess it's not necessarily a scissors concept, but you're kind of like having a Y concept that would go out from those two players, where you're able to see at this point you've got three guys in coverage. You've got Michael Wilson taking the guy outside. The safety is taking the deep man to make sure at least that if the ball, Trey McBride, he's got leverage on these two guys right here. So if he goes and splits deep, that safety is going to have to be able to watch there. It's one of those plays where this is part of the Matt Patricia defense that you're kind of playing without enough bodies on the line because you've got the one safety deep. We've seen in the National Football League a move to guys being able to play more cover two, where you've got the two safeties are taking away some of the deep passes and you can play more quarters coverage or mix it up. And what we've seen with Matt Patricia in a lot of ways, I think that's an interesting is we've seen him kind of not trust the linebackers that he has and kind of leaving an extra safety down here. So you can see here they got Blankenship is put in the back. You've got Bayard is the other safety who's coming in close. You got the two linebackers that are here in the middle of the field. And he doesn't trust those linebackers in coverage enough to be able to actually get them out. So Stunt that Hassan Reddick does get picked up nicely by Froholt, and you can see here that the Cardinals with Greg Dortch are able to kind of run that wide concept where he's able to just kind of go up the field, use his hands to get off and separate. And Kyler puts it in a perfect spot on the outside shoulder for him to be able to catch it and then leave the rest to Greg Dortch.
Yeah, but he threw it on the run. On those last two, that was all that's all timing. And I don't know if people understand how hard those throws are. They're very hard to make, especially when they're outside the numbers and you have to throw it with enough velocity to get there in time, because you don't want to throw it where it's too high up and too much of a touch, because that lets the defensive back come back in and make the play. He has to throw with velocity and timing. So on that first out route, that was great timing on him. That's called chemistry, and he is showing right now that he has really good chemistry with Greg Dortch. Right here is it's just a repeat of what happened about, what was it, like a week ago, when he threw it to Greg Dortch on the.
Yep.
So he's running all the way across the field, basically running what you would say is like an under route, or maybe just, I'm not even sure, to be honest with you,
Yeah,
like what
it
you
was
would
it
call
was the
that,
same
like
type
big.
of. I think that one looks like it's an over is for that route because they run a lot of these things that are kind of going across the field in different places. But this is one of those plays where you see him run through the tackle, and like Greg Dortch, he is not a big guy. Like, but being able to have the ability to run through with each of those different places with the tackle is something that part of why he's stuck around so far is because someone said you can see some of those punt return skills where he has the balance upon contact to keep his balance and keep running. That's one of those types of athletes that you're going to be able to have, at least as part of why they like him on punt returns. And then you can see here, Michael Wilson at least kind of gets him the block. I think I talked with someone about how there's a possibility if he keeps it outside, he could score. I think that was something in the moment where perhaps, but also you can see at least the block that he's getting. Michael Wilson at least is able to recognize, so he's trying to keep the outside leverage on Dortch. Wilson kind of loses a little bit of that outside leverage, which is why Dortch then decides to cut it back. And there is a safety here. I think that he made the right decision. Maybe if Michael Wilson is on that block a second earlier, it can drive him back a little bit. Dortch may just be scoring right there. He instead ends up running back right into Blankenship, but there's about less than a minute left at this point. James Conner is the guy who's able to get the ball into the end zone. It was just a great play from the Arizona Cardinals, being able to have that done. And I think we do want to be able to see at least there is an awesome throw that Kyler had to James Conner that basically was just super impressive that he was able to make, at least with that red zone touchdown, where he had James Conner with a bullet pass, at least, that hit James Conner, where he just makes a one-handed catch. And that was one of those places where it kind of felt like all right, like, the idea of Kyler Murray in people's heads has always been about potential. We've seen some of those plays before. We saw a little bit of that to Trey McBride this season. That was kind of the, Kyler, like, he's back type of a moment, I think, for a lot of Cardinals fans after a season in which he really has, I think, not basically been as super impressive, but he hasn't been in a spot where you feel like you have to move on. It was a phenomenal touchdown. Let me pull that up here with the James Conner one on the screen here.
Yeah, he points him out on the broken play.
So, yeah, this is basically, you got and this is Matt Patricia defense. 5 guys down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is what we talked about. Cardinals would split off of the line, forcing Reddick to be in coverage. Kyler Murray at least takes the ball. You can see James Conner. He gets under pressure, gets away from it, looks back, sees Conner, and then he puts the ball in a great spot. It's a little bit outside. Great play by James Conner. Huge day for Conner as well, getting about 120 yards plus that touchdown. Just very difficult to be able to stop that type of a play and catch because what are you going to do? He's just reaching out with one hand and snagging it. Kyler under pressure, gets away, is able to put the ball in a place where only his guy can catch it. Really a good showing for the Cardinals, and now they head into a season finale against the Seattle Seahawks, which would be for as high as the number 3 pick and maybe even as high as number 2, although I think that's unlikely, and as low as the number 7 pick, Marcos.
Yeah, at this point, so I guess the goal has been to at least put the Cardinals in a position where they can't have a QB as an option. I am going to be somebody who's going to kind of be torn because of the fact that, it's not so much that we can't draft another wide receiver in the first round or in the second round or whatnot. just so that elusive Ohio State like stud has been evading the Cardinals for years, and for many reasons. One, because we're not in position to be able to draft them, or two, they get taken by the time we are up on the board. So I mean, we're mostly going to be thinking maybe they're just going to either trade back out of the position than they're at. And Malik Neighbors, I'm not sure what pick he's supposed to be going in, but I mean, that is a consolation prize. I mean, Malik Neighbors is also a beast, and you also have other talent at wide receiver. What was I going to mention quickly about that throw to James Conner, that broken play that he was able to point out, throw off his back foot, float it over, and James Conner making that one-handed catch. That's like synonymous of what they do to each other when it comes to like understanding what kind of throw is going to work for James Conner and knowing that he could do a one-handed catch on that. So that was a thing of beauty.
It's having that chemistry, I think, which is important, and that's part of what we've seen with these Cardinals team has been Kyler and Michael Wilson. They were able to get back together for a touchdown. That's a lot of with rookies. Like, you're going to have mistakes and rookie mistakes. It's how you're able to overcome them that ends up being the big deal. And we got to see Michael Wilson get some separation, run over on that slant route right in between the two safeties. Kyler put it on him to be able to get that touchdown to tie the game. And for where the Cardinals are now, it's going to be interesting. We'll have the Seattle Overload guys at least on a podcast on this Saturday. Usually it's always Tuesdays, Thursdays, and then Saturdays are the other time for the show. But let's do a quick talk about where the Cardinals are heading into this last week. So the Bears, thanks to the Panthers, in a game in which the Cardinals and lose and the Bears see the Carolina Panthers win. Arizona would have been picking number one. Instead, the Cardinals win, and the Panthers put 0 points up on there. Their owner tosses a drink on a fan, gets fined $300K, which would be like fining a person $1.77, considering how many billions he has. It's more about just the rough mess that they seem to fall in. The Washington Commanders move back up in the draft order. Right now, they were able to at least probably have the second pick on a totally, unless the Cardinals game would have been a loss for them. That kind of has kept Arizona into the top 5 picks and has kind of guaranteed them to be picking in the top 7. With that strength of schedule, you can see that they would plummet all the way down to 7 with a win if one of the Giants, Chargers, or Titans win in their final week. And you can see they've all lost 3 and 4 in a row. Maybe one of them's due. I don't think it's going to be the Commanders, unfortunately, because they play the Cowboys. And we have now, with going into the last week, the New England Patriots going up against the New York Jets. That is, I think, the biggest thing for Cardinals fans to look at is, one, are they going to compete against the Seahawks? We'll talk more about that on Saturday. But two, if you look at where the draft order is set up right now, there's 2 kind of thoughts that people are having. The first one, at least, is all of these teams above could probably use a quarterback, except for Chicago. But Chicago, being in the number 1 spot, could still take a quarterback. So what does that mean for Cardinals fans? Well, I think one of the things it looks like in this mock draft you can see there, they have 3 quarterbacks going first. They have Caleb Williams going, probably trading Justin Fields to a team like Atlanta. Drake May goes with the number 2 pick. And then Jaden Daniels goes to the New England Patriots at the 3rd pick, which leaves Marvin Harrison Jr. for the Cardinals. I do think there is a possibility that we would see that the Bears could at least look over at the Patriots and say, hey, you guys want the number 1 quarterback over the Commanders? We'll trade back with you to number 3, and then we'll take a Marvin Harrison Jr. right ahead of Arizona. I think that would leave questions of could the Cardinals go with someone like Olu Fashanu or Joe Alt, who are the top 2 tackles. Could they take a Malik Neighbors if Marvin Harrison Jr. is off the board? He's the best player in the class, and there's a need at wide receiver. So I don't think that you would have an offensive tackle over Marvin Harrison Jr., but Arizona's draft strategy is probably going to change some with the news that DJ Humphries is heading to injured reserve. He is due, I believe, about $22 million next year. The Cardinals will probably still cut him. It's going to be $7 million in cap space. They could have probably gotten up to $10 million. Unfortunately, he's going to have some injury guarantees for the most part with next year, and it will probably spell the end of his time in the desert because you just can't really keep him on the roster all throughout this next year and be able to play him when you could use that $7 million to sign someone to replace him. It's a tough finish for him as a Cardinal. He's been probably out of all of the Steve Keim drafts, he's probably been, I would say, the best draft pick that Steve Keim has made as far as longevity for the Cardinals, because even the Buda Baker draft pick, that was a pretty obvious like first round you had to trade up for. This was a pick in which you kind of were taking a chance on a guy at right tackle who'd come off of an injury, and being able to have him as a franchise left tackle for the past few years, like he has been for Arizona since 20, I believe it was 2017. I don't know, 2016 is when he started. 2016 onward. That's a long stretch. He's been a team captain. I'm really glad for what he brought to Arizona. I'm disappointed, and I do think that it shows Arizona probably knew going into this season that they were going to have to move on at some point from DJ Humphries. And so because you've got Paris Johnson, it's now not like it's a huge big need, but it may affect who they take with that pick number 4, or as we can see here down later in the draft, the 17th pick, they have a defensive lineman that's there, whereas there could be a guy like a Talesi Fuaga or an Amarius Mims could be the guy for Arizona later in that first round because of how difficult it is to find starting tackles, and you've got a big need now, and having to plug that gap with probably a high pick, knowing that you're not going to have a lot of guys in free agency available.
Yeah, see, it would be nice to have a Josh Jones right about now. And that's what I was like fearing because of the fact that he gave us a starting position, a starting tackle at the very least, especially at left tackle. He played not only admirably, but he was like the second highest graded tackle last year, or the best or the highest graded tackle last year for the Arizona Cardinals at left tackle. So that would have obviously come in useful to be able to just move off of DJ Humphries. Now, I will say we drafted Paris Johnson. We know that we need left tackle as the important position on the team. It's going to be time where we're going to have to start talking about moving him over to the left side. There was some conversation that was brought up. It was a question that was brought up during a TNF stream for the Bootleg podcast. And it was an interesting question to pose some like Brett Coleman to think about this. But so with the new rules and the changes with like practice, how we have limited practices now, we don't have as many practices as we used to, mostly because of injuries. It's starting to show that it's stunting the growth of these tackles that are being taken because of the fact that they're not getting not only the full-time usage, but because they're also not getting enough reps off the field to be able to develop themselves. So there was like some sort of like a incline that was happening, and now it's kind of being a steady like parallel line, and then it's kind of moving upward little by little once the experience is gained, and it's hurting their development. And like I've mentioned before, and this is something that he also echoed, it's not always the first tackle in their draft that's the best tackle. Most of the time it'll be like the third, fourth, or fifth, or sixth best tackle in the draft that ends up becoming not only the starter but the better prospect. And also it also depends where the person gets drafted, what kind of culture do they have, and are they good at being able to develop tackles as well. So I really like that. If you scroll down to the second pick, those tackles in that situation, especially that 6'7" guy, Amarius Mims, that guy, I mean, he looks pretty
built in
impressive.
A lab. Like that's just,
yeah, exactly.
He and Joe Alt are just these giant players, at least. What's funny is that like their athleticism is so on point that you can be 6'7", 330 pounds, and yet you're watching them being able. I think that these 6'8", 322. I could see Mims potentially moving into a guard spot if tackle doesn't work, and that's one of those things at least where we saw that happen previously with, I believe it was Leonard Davis with the Cardinals. He was a right tackle for them, moves and becomes a Pro Bowl right guard for them. That's one of those guys who's just a football player. I think you would probably say that he would fit in as your right tackle and be a road grader there as well.
Yeah, road
There's
grader,
options
exactly.
that you would have. I love the Jerzan Newton pick because I do think defensive line is probably the top need that the Cardinals have, even more than technically a receiver or a corner or a tackle, maybe, because you have your left tackle. You can probably get a receiver in one of those rounds. There's some guys at least we can talk about in the future. And it's going to be hard because you want to be able to lean into the potential of the draft into some of the draft's better positions just to get the best players possible. If you force a need, we've seen that happen before where the Cardinals then passed on an Adrian Peterson because they needed a left tackle more. I think it'll be interesting to me to see. There's kind of a couple of questions here as we close today. We'll talk about more on Saturday. The first one is, did Kyler declare himself as the guy? Because as I've said, if he wants to not have people talk about replacing him with a different quarterback and trading him, he's going to have to win enough games to get out of that position. And as of right now, he's done it, certainly.
Pretty much.
What's also interesting is the Caleb Williams question for Chicago at one has become very interesting because of how well Justin Fields has played over the last few weeks. I've seen enough people saying they're just probably could keep Fields, look to trade back and get a haul. You've seen others who have said, hey, like they should just take him, get a second or third round pick for him, and be able to move ahead with a probably higher ceiling type of passer in Caleb or Drake. And most people have leaned Caleb. And then the other thing is, there's someone who even posed this question. Let's say that the Bears should just take Marvin Harrison Jr. at one. Well, you can probably trade back with some QB needy teams here. I saw someone suggest the other day, look, if the Cardinals are all in on Kyler Murray, then you don't have to worry about taking a quarterback. If you're not sold on Kyler Murray, you've been set up with the number 4 overall pick and the number 17 overall pick. If you want to, you could just say, hey, Chicago, if you're going to keep Justin Fields and you want a Marvin Harrison Jr., cool. We'll give you both of those picks. No one else is going to be able to match that without giving up a future first, a first-round pick in 2026. That is something that if it's available, Cardinals could make that move, which would show you that if they do stay put and take a Marvin Harrison Jr., that would show, I think, a lot of belief in a Kyler Murray. And at the end of the day, there's opportunity here to trade back. If you see Caleb Williams, Drake May go with the 1-2 pick and Chicago take a Marvin Harrison Jr. there, guess what? You've got a Malik Neighbors sitting there for you at pick number 4. I've heard some people say that Chicago may feel like Neighbors may fit them better for one reason or another. That'd be really interesting. He did have 1,600 yards this year. You could potentially look at one of these teams back here, such as the Falcons. If the Raiders are not able to go and are the ones who go after Justin Fields, you could look at a Rome Odunze back over there. The Vikings are picking at 12th. There could be the possibility of one of these teams wants to say, hey, look, Giants, maybe they're not sold on Daniel Jones. Who knows what happens with their coach. Titans, at least, they got Will Levis. He's hurt for the year for the most part, at least, and he is out. I believe that he took an injury in the last game, unless I'm mistaken. With a foot injury, was carted off. You've got at least a couple of these teams back here that could use a quarterback. The Broncos, obviously. It will be interesting to see. Could the Cardinals do another trade back and then trade up again? We'll talk a little bit more about that on Saturday with some possibilities, especially with looking at the Seahawks game. If they're able to beat the Seahawks, totally different conversation I think we're having, but I'm excited to see what that will hold.
Well, I'll go ahead and issue a challenge to Kyler Murray right now because he has a losing streak against the NFC West. Mm-hmm. Do well enough in this game. You don't have to win. You're fine. You're going to be our quarterback next year. There's no debate about that. He's going to be the quarterback for the Cardinals next year. But do so in a way where, like, you show that you can actually overcome what these defenses have been throwing at you from the NFC West, because it hasn't been pretty with NFC West opponents, mostly because of the fact that they have forced them to have to throw short of the sticks or to the flats a lot of times because of the fact that they know where his shortcomings come from. But he has the ability to overcome that as long as he's able to trust his receivers over the middle. He's got a big weapon to Trey McBride, who he really trusts, that we've seen. And Greg Dortch has been one of his biggest safety valves at the size of like 5'7", but he plays bigger than what his size is, and he trusts him. So that's my main reason for wanting to move off of someone like Rondale Moore and Hollywood Brown, because that takes away snaps from Greg Dortch, who has made more from his possessions and has shown better hands than either of those two receivers. So he's got like a good core. He's got Michael Wilson, who's developing chemistry with, which is going to be great. Michael Wilson's 6'2". So going into next year, I think that core is going to be looking really great with the addition of any of those first round like wide receivers, especially if it's Marvin Harrison Jr. So I would like to issue the challenge to Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray, just show us that you can overcome your obstacles going up against the Seahawks every single team on the NFC West has faced you, uh, obviously your entire career. They know how to defend you. They know that you will have the tendency of trying to throw quick. Just trust your wide receivers that they'll be able to do the work. And I mean, get really hit practice really hard this week.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk a little
Don't
bit
win.
more about that. We'll talk a little more about that wide receiver versus offensive line play, at least, as well as looking, can the Cardinals be able to beat the Seahawks, knock them out of the playoffs, and get their 5th win of the season? Or is this going to be the first Cardinals team in forever to go 0-6 against the NFC West? A lot to be able to play for, despite not having that much to play for. Could the Cardinals win themselves out of any Marvin Harrison Jr. conversation? There's all sorts of stuff to talk about. We'll be back here on Saturday to be able to talk about that with Maddie Brown from the Seattle Overload podcast. Right now is planning at least to be with us. Thank you guys again so much for tuning in. This has been the Bird Reboot Podcast. Make sure that you are tuning in. We'll have a little bit more tune-ups that I think are needed, at least with the podcast, as we head into the off-season and into draft season. We got one of these games left for the Cardinals this season. Let's see if they can make it count. For Marcos Labrada, I'm Blake Murphy. You can make sure you follow us at our respective ats below, Blake Murphy7 and at Pancakes Soul on X, Twitter, as well as make sure that you're following the Bird Reboot Podcast at Bird Reboot. Thank you guys again for tuning in, and go Cardinals.
See you guys. Go Cards.